Let's look a little bit deeper into these architectures and see where they make sense and where they do not. So in a centralized mode, you have all the traffic, data traffic, that is going to go through the access point to the controller. So when you have access points connecting through maybe many switches to the controller, and you have a wireless client connecting to the access points, you're going to go through the controller. In many cases, this is very logical. But in some cases, it doesn't make much sense. For example, suppose you have this phone here, and your wireless phone tries to communicate with that wired phone. If you are in a centralized mode, what is going to happen is that all your traffic is going to go through the controller, just like this. So you see, if you look at this topology, you say, that's a case where this flow is not very logical. But it's difficult to avoid, because in a centralized mode, everything that is received from the client at the access point level is going to be encapsulated into CapWAP and then sent to the controller. The AP is not going to look at what is inside because it's operating in centralized mode. So the controller is going to look at what is inside and see that the destination IP address is device, which is in this case a phone, and it's just going to forward this traffic to the wired network, and it just happens so that this traffic is going to actually go back to the first switch where the phone is and end up there. So seen from the outside, it's a case where that kind of centralized mode doesn't seem very logical. However, from a deployment standpoint, it's just IP to IP. So unless you see this topology and understand that it's suboptimal, it's something that may be happening in your network. But if you understand that this is what is happening in your case, then it may make sense to bring that controller function down to the switch. And this is where the converged access concept comes into play, where we say the access switch is not only the place where wired devices are going to be connecting to the wired network, it's also the place where wireless access points are going to be connecting to the wired network. And because we have this wireless to wired connection convergence, maybe we can make them converge inside a switch instead of delegating the control of wireless to an overlay appliance somewhere on the right side of the network. So we take the controller function and we bring it all the way down to the switch so that the place where the access points are going to send the client traffic, instead of being a remote appliance on the right, is going to be that switch, exactly where the access point connects, right there, no further. And in that case, you can suppress the controller on the right because the controller function is in the switch. And in the case of that phone communication that we're talking about, which is very common in a branch scenario, for example, then the topology is very simple because the AP is going to send the traffic it received from the client to the controller, which is right there where the AP connects on the switch. So the switch itself is going to be the place where the traffic is going to be forwarded from the wireless side of things to the wired side of things. And good news, this is exactly where the phone connects. So that creates a very short connection between the wireless and the wired world. Be careful, it's about the access, right? So the idea here is to be more efficient in terms of access. And in that type of communication, this is a very logical way of doing things. It doesn't mean that it is something that should be made everywhere in every single case. Because the idea behind converged access is that you are at the access layer. This is where devices connect to the wired network. And this is where sometimes, if your traffic stays at the access layer, at the access switch, it makes sense to bring the controller function into the switch. But in topologies where this is just the access and then you send the traffic to some other layers, distribution for example, then bringing the controller function inside the switch may not be very logical, because you need to have as many controller functions as you have switches that connect access points. You may be aware, if you remember with CCNA routing and switching, that Cisco has the 3-layer logic and topology where you have the access layer, then the distribution layer, and then the core layer. So converged access makes sense when traffic needs to stay at the access layer. Whenever traffic needs to go beyond the access layer, if most of your traffic goes through distribution or core, then having the access points connect to a controller right at the access is not necessary anymore. And then maybe if you go to the distribution or the core anyway, it may be worthwhile to have the controller there so that at least there is only one single point of configuration instead of having to have each switch becoming a wireless point of configuration. Because you see, if you have many closets and many access points, and in each closet you have switches that connect access points, that makes that each of your switch is potentially becoming a place where you want to put a controller function. then management and scalability may be more difficult there. But we have solutions again. We'll talk about it later on. But understand that if you multiply this access logic, and if communication doesn't stay at the access layer, well, you might as well have a centralized controller. By the way, you can combine them together. You may have one switch, or maybe many, that have a controller function inside, and those are going to be converged access solutions. And then you may also have some appliance or appliances somewhere that can be connecting access points that are not connecting to a controller inside their switch. So you may have an hybrid mode where you have some centralized connections where there is an appliance, virtual or physical, managing access points are connecting to various switches. And you may also have some converged access switches that have a controller function inside to manage their own access points. Why not? You can combine these solutions. What is important for the exam is that you understand the difference between the centralized mode, where the access points are connecting to that appliance that is managing them, to the converged access mode, where you converge the wireless connection and the wired connection, so the controller function is inside a switch that is at the access layer.